Well, look, I mean, there already are sanctions on Russia, of course, as you know. And so the question is sort of uh, to what extent is the executive branch, as the president, willing to enforce existing sanctions? So that's question number one. As for question number two, whether or not Donald Trump will be willing to impose additional sanctions on Russia, I think that's a difficult question to answer. This is someone who changes his mind kind of every single day. I mean, he could change his mind from in the evening after, he had a particularly good or bad dinner. So I think it's hard to guess exactly what it would take for Trump to increase the sanctions on Russia. I will say that I think it is more likely that Trump will do something with sanctions than it is that he would significantly increase his support for Ukraine. And the reason for that, I think, is twofold. Number one, I think Republicans tend to believe that that Russia is fundamentally dangerous. Like there is still that belief among Republicans. Of course, not all Republicans. The Republican Party is very split. There is a civil war, in fact, right now going on within the Republican Party between two factions. And let's say one faction is led by Tucker Carlson, who is pro-Russia, pro-Putin. This is someone who interviewed Dugin recently, right? So again, he is someone who is very sympathetic to the Russian message. And then on the other side of that is the somewhat at least more traditional Republican approach, which understands that Russia is a foe, an enemy, an adversary of America. And, this is represented by people like Congressman Don Bacon, Senator Lindsey Graham, et cetera. And actually a fair number of people in the Senate, at least, are supportive of this. So within this civil war, we see on the one hand that the Senate has now voted with 80 people in support of additional sanctions on Russia. But at the same time, we are seeing messaging from the administration about possible future business deals with Russia, minerals, and so on and so forth. And again, we're kind of seeing these trial balloons that the administration's putting out, I think, to both sides of the civil war, where on the one side, they're not saying no to new sanctions. They're allowing the Senate movement to proceed. But on the other hand, they're also talking about potential business deals with Russia. And so the question, I think, is ultimately, if the administration finally has to make a choice, what choice will they make? And my intuition, my gut tells me that they are going to try to avoid making a choice altogether. That they are basically going to try to maintain the status quo. They're not going to increase the sanctions on Russia, but nor will they get rid of them altogether. I think they're going to sort of maintain where things are. Now, again, that may change. Trump may get it more frustrated. Maybe, someone might make a trade-related argument to Donald Trump. And this is where, that second piece, I think, of Trump's psychological makeup comes in, where he is someone who is clearly pro-tariff. He's someone who is deathly afraid of any kind of trade imbalance. And so, I think you mix that in with, perhaps some element of frustration with Putin for his unwillingness to offer any type of compromise or any type of concessions. And, I think there's a chance that we could use that avenue, that we could kind of approach that from that point of view to try to get the administration to take a firmer line. But when push comes to shove, if the goal is to try to get more sanctions on Russia, I think first and foremost, we have to turn to Europe. Europe needs to be the one leading the sanctions movement and limiting Russia's involvement with the global economy.
Uriel, yesterday we saw high-level negotiation, and just a day earlier, Ukraine launched a major strike on Russia aircraft. Trump waited until the talks were over before the White House made any public comment, and that comment was surprisingly restrained. So can we say that Trump, in a way, supports Ukraine, or at least didn't criticize or express disappointment?
I think Donald Trump respects strength, period. He's the ultimate person who believes that might makes right. If you recall, when Zelensky came to the White House, what is it that Trump said to him? You, Vladimir, you don't hold the cards. You don't have the cards. That was his argument. It's not about morality, right? It's not about who's right and who's wrong. I don't think Trump particularly cares about who's right and who's wrong. I think Trump cares about whether somebody looks strong or whether they look weak. So this operation over this weekend was an incredibly important one, not only because it achieved an incredible tactical victory for Ukraine by destroying a significant number of Russian strategic bombers, the impact of which, by the way, will be felt far beyond Ukrainian or Russian borders. I mean, these are the same planes that Russia uses to harass NATO countries. So it's actually NATO right now that offers a debt of gratitude to Ukraine for having destroyed a not insignificant percentage of Russia's strategic bomber fleet. But the second point, which I think is equally important, is that this made Ukraine look strong. It made Ukraine look like they do have an ability to to actually achieve victory, to achieve some semblance of victory. And I think Donald Trump respects that.
But when Russia tried to hit us, Trump said, Vladimir, stop, don't do this. But when we do not the same, but start hitting Russia aircraft, they just make it quiet, I don't know.
Well, okay, first of all, there's a big difference between Russia targeting Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, civilian apartment buildings, killing civilians, and so forth, and Ukraine hitting strategic bombers, right? I mean, I think even Donald Trump, I think even President Trump realizes that there's a big difference between these two things. So that's point number one. Point number two is, as much as I would like to read more into the fact that Donald Trump recently criticized Putin's missile strikes, but he did not criticize Ukraine's bomber strike, I think one can be explained by point number one. But two, again, Donald Trump is not consistent. This is someone, we try to parse their every word, but the truth is that those words might change, not just day to day, but hour to hour. And so it's a difficult thing to do. And so, yeah, Donald Trump this time around did not criticize Ukraine's attack, but in the same Truth Social post where he criticized Putin's attack on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, he also criticized President Zelensky. Right, literally in the same post, he talks about Putin's attack, and he criticizes Putin, and then he says, likewise, every word out of President Zelensky's mouth makes things worse. He should stop talking, essentially. Again, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but the key point was that he used the word likewise, indicating some element of equivalence between what Putin did in killing dozens of Ukrainian civilians and what Zelensky did, which was essentially speak out in defense of his country. And in Donald Trump's mind, I think he does see an equivalence. And I think, much like the Shakespearean play, what I'm afraid of and what I think there's a chance of is Donald Trump saying a pox on both their houses. And they are equally guilty, equally culpable. I'm out. And so again, when I look at his commentary on this recent Ukrainian strike, the fact that he hasn't been negative, great, that's positive.
Yeah.
But I think it would have been very difficult for him to have criticized Ukraine for doing this when the objective was so clearly military in nature. And when, quite frankly, it was as successful as it was, because not only does it indicate that Ukraine is stronger than perhaps he believed, but that Russia is weaker.
Yes. Okay. Let's talk about the trade war. What's happening right now between China and the U.S. Investors seems deeply concerned.
So you're talking about the trade, yeah. Look, again, this is where you see Donald Trump's words changing from day to day and week to week. The question, Donald Trump basically claims that China did not live up to the spirit of the agreement that they came to with the United States. I'll be honest, I have not read that agreement. I've not looked into the details of this. I think it's unquestionable that China has been doing everything it can to cheat in the international trade. They're subsidizing their industries. They are doing any number of things in order to give themselves and their companies an unfair advantage, not to mention participating in, just incredible amounts of corporate espionage, et cetera. So I'm sympathetic with the criticism